Hi everyone, just going to wait another 30 seconds or so before we kick off. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to our webinar on how to make the B2B customer experience even better through customer data. I just want to take a moment to recognise the traditional custodians of the land we gather on today. For me, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I want to pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. Also for our New Zealand brother and sisters, I summon from above, below, within, from the outside environment to calm and settle the vital inner essence, the well-being of everyone. Be joined together and united. Just want to make a quick reminder that Salesforce is a publicly listed company. So whilst Ian might share some fantastic features, all purchasing decisions should be made on products available today. Throughout this session, we're going to be giving you the opportunity to ask questions. There's a Q&A section at the bottom. Please pop those questions in there and we're going to get to them as many as we can at the end from you. So please pop them in as we go. So my name's Jared. I'm going to host the webinar for today. I've got two really great panelists, really smart people joining us, experts in this topic. I'd like to give a really warm welcome to Ian Kalpin. He's the Regional Vice President of ANZ Cloud Ecosystems at Salesforce, and John Cosgrove, or JC, who's the CEO of Lightfold. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'm just going to give them a chance to introduce themselves. I'm going to give it to you first, Ian.
Beautiful. Jared, thank you very much for having me. For those that I've not come across, Ian Kalpin, 7 years at Salesforce, and the opportunity that I've got today is to lead the team that works with our fantastic consulting partner ecosystem, really focused in on kind of what we call horizontal or domain capable organizations that are really focused on understanding not just within the industry or the vertical that you operate, but also within things like deep contact center expertise, or as we're talking about today, how to actually put data to work. So some of those horizontal capabilities, which manifest in products for us, but ultimately trying to make sure that our tools find value for our customers through the hands of our consulting ecosystem.
And JC?
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. JC, John Cosgrove, CEO and one of the founders at Lightfold. We're the customer data company. We specialize in the mobilization of data to the cloud, particularly in the middle of what is an explosion in cloud data warehousing and cloud data platforms, but particularly very focused on customer centricity and how we do that, and mobilizing that data to support really sales, service, and marketing, not just back-end reporting. We do a lot of work in the Salesforce ecosystem, as obviously, it's the world's #1 CRM, customer success platform, and very excited with the stuff that Ian's team and that obviously CloudWorks are doing in this space. So it's great to be here today.
Awesome. So this is the fourth webinar in our series focusing on B2B companies, obviously the biggest and the best with these maestros in front of me. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I just want to ask your personal opinions on some of the current trends you've seen in that B2B landscape in relation to this topic of unlocking the power of data and the customer 360. So maybe Ian first, just a headline on the trends you've seen in the last 12 months or so.
So I think one of the things we often forget about is that 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. So a lot of terminology discussion, B2C, B2B, large enterprise through into small SMBs is talking about data silos. Now, I fundamentally think data stores are not a bad thing. Data should live where it should live. It only becomes a problem if it becomes siloed and you can't actually find a way of taking everything you know about your organization, your relationship with your customers, and being able to mobilize that to actually put it to work. Data is the greatest asset any of us have. And if we're not able to figure out a way of breaking down those internal silos, making everything that we know about our customer provide a better experience and better discussions and position better offerings and provide better servicing, there's very, very quickly going to become a massive revenue cost and competitive impact when it comes to the experience you're able to provide to a customer, which can be either provide distance between you and your competitors or see you fall behind them.
That's really interesting. I'm gonna press on one of those points in a second, but before I do, JC, your thoughts on the trends that you're seeing in that B2B space?
Yeah, well, the biggest one obviously for us has been huge change in what's possible now with cloud data architectures. Data has been a really intractable thing in the whole cloud explosion because it's big and heavy and difficult, but that's not the case anymore. So we're seeing a huge number of businesses embracing wholesale lifting of data, databases, silos, stores, into the cloud, and doing so at actually usually a cost savings, at a reduction in the cost of how that's been done previously. And the advantage to that obviously is that as we're moving more and more of the data natively to the cloud, it's in the perfect position then to interact with things like the sales, service, and marketing interface layers that you would get from something like Salesforce. So that's provoking a change as well in the thinking. People are beginning to kind of connect the dots to go, this is actually the data that we need to achieve the type of personalization experiences, to achieve the type of differentiated experiences that we're kind of banking on in order to compete. And that's also then what gives rise to that whole CDP conversation that we're seeing. We've seen the CDP space explode. Now it's changing again. I might actually get in front of you and throw back to Ian if I can, because I know that's a space Salesforce has an opinion on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, CDP is not just a new acronym within the tech industry, or the idea of a customer data platform. And it's not actually anything that's wildly new. CDPs have been around for probably up to 7 years. And even if you look like a decade ago, you kind of had MDMs, or master data management. The real idea and purpose behind a CDP is, how do you democratize everything that is available from a data asset within your organization and put it into the hands of the people at the coalface of the customer? So that comes with combining the data sources, trying to deduplicate and have kind of that single golden record of customer across logistics systems, service interactions, B2B selling, and not make it kind of a long, lengthy process of raising IT tickets or trying to get somebody freed up with deep technical skills to be able to surface that up. So then you can either run better personalized kind of contact center engagements, B2B selling. Now, there's been a big shift, probably as any new piece of technology comes into, I always like referencing the Gartner hype cycle, because there's this massive kind of peak in terms of like the trough of inflated expectations, very quickly followed by the trough of disillusionment. Apart from just getting the opportunity to say those, because I think it's quite fun, it is actually quite real, because it's these ideas of, there's these problems 5-10 years in the future, and we're going to build something. The reality of what it gets talked about until where it actually delivers, and then goes through this period of normalization, and then kind of a plateau of productivity is the end. CDPs are through the trough of disillusionment. They have been tested. Salesforce has definitely not been the first to market. There was a whole kind of generation 1 of CDPs that were really the early adopters. And what we were seeing with them is, they're really like centrally focused on the marketing use case. How can a marketer send a better email, provide a better campaign brief based on all the information they have about their customer? Where Salesforce is a kind of CRM and kind of full 360 engagement platform is taking a slightly different approach, is we're taking all that same information, but then surfacing it up in a way that makes the selling, the servicing, and the marketing, or the e-commerce departments or customer interaction points have immediate real-time access to that same information.
Yeah, I just want to stress a couple of things there. You're saying, Ian, that in some ways, you were talking to, CloudWorks, the kind of core market is that mid-sized B2B company. A lot of those large enterprises have done a lot of that heavy lifting in this space, right? You're talking about the peaks and the troughs, and that disillusionment with technology when it first comes to market, that we're now in that space where it's democratized. And companies that we work with, and probably a lot of companies on the call listening in, it's time. CDPs are now ripe for everybody, not just Telstra or BHP or those kind of companies. The other thing that you said earlier, which I really liked, especially from a customer platform like Salesforce, the data silos are okay. You mentioned that it's not the data silos inherently are evil or bad, and that's just going to be normal. But it's about what can we do with them? Like, how do we get that data into a place where it's usable? And JC, you talked about data-driven insights is a foundation for strategic decision-making, not just personalized experiences, because you'll hear a lot of this marketing, the marketing use cases for getting this data to create personalized, which is completely valid, but it's bigger than that, right? It's not just a marketing tool anymore. You can use it for all sorts of use cases. And one other thing I think you said, Ian, which was really interesting for me, is that the costs, or maybe it was you, John, have really come down. Like when you started in this space, John, however many decades ago, you know, you're looking surprisingly
at the dawn of time
for someone who spent so long with data, that, you know, you're seeing more and more companies in that middle tier jumping on board this trend, right?
Well, you're certainly talking about a world where the traditional, the whole idea of how we approach data is actually being given new names. This idea of the modern data stack, it genuinely is the biggest change in the data landscape. The hard, you know, enterprise level data landscape we're talking about here is that you go from a data warehouse initiative routinely expecting to be like a $5 million 10-year project. And we now have people that are completely replatforming or building from scratch, and it's costing, you know, 1/20th of that, if even that. It is a dramatic reduction in what it takes to set them up. And that what that's really done is that it's allowed data is now behaving when you're doing it well, you can now do it in a truly agile way, which is how all the cloud application layers work. And that's also then what's driving this conversation then about CDP. Like the data needs to be used, needs to be mobilized. And so the space is, what are the tools that help you mobilize it? So that your unique strategy using that data can then succeed in the marketplace. And that's that point about it serves a strategic reporting function, but the exact same data is also what's going to drive your personalization. From the data perspective, it's the same stuff.
You're not doing it twice.
You're not doing it twice.
You're setting a foundation up once
Correct.
for many different parts of your business.
Correct.
So let's use an example. So knowing how a customer interacts with your brand, right? How they buy, their experience, all of that's really crucial. And without that, it's really hard to make good decisions. How do I adapt? How do I improve? Basically, I'm guessing otherwise. And some cases, there's a risk of losing customers at the back door without understanding how they're interacting with me as a business, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, one of the things that we spend a lot of time at the moment trying to advise people on is we've been talking about digital transformation for many years. And I think most people have either encountered it or had a try at it in this space by now. But typically when you're talking about digi transforms, there's also somebody talking about customer lifecycle or customer journey. Many people are trying to compete, as they rightly should, on providing a differentiated customer experience. But what we often find is that people haven't yet connected the dots around, let's say you build out a 5-step journey that you really want to try and execute on. How are you actually collecting the data when they do that, as well as supplying the data that tells them when to do that? Like that's a very real thing. I've been involved in many digital transformation projects that unfortunately have come to that a bit late and realized even if we pull off the thing, we're then kind of flying blind. We can't see it. And the platforms that we're now talking about, again, they can kind of do both. That instead of having to solve that with now a whole other, you know, integration heavy solution to pull the data back out, with the right architecture, actually it should be doing both. It should be bidirectional, and you should be incorporating those data points into how you're designing the target customer experience. So the collection is just as important.
To understanding and optimizing a customer journey. Ian, what just want to throw to you for your 2 cents here?
Because I think something JC mentioned really, it also triggered a lot of the discussions that we end up having with our customers around like who actually owns the data. Like you can have a CIO or kind of a more technical function within an organization. And if you think about their priorities of that leader, it's all like security is at the forefront of that, making sure that the customer information is just kind of centralized and controlled and taxonomized, but it's secure. So we're not going to end up as the next data breach. You then think about somebody in the marketing department, they don't stay up at night worried about that. And so there's this whole like accessibility, democratization, but ownership and accessibility debate that happens within organizations. And so I think a big thing that we're seeing is like in discussions with customers, again, because Salesforce's traditional heritage is very much kind of, we talk to the front office, but we're very well trusted by IT. So CIOs, CTOs, like strong relationships where a lot of the traditional like kind of purchasing power for programs to work that involved our technology live. But then when you start getting into talking to marketers and the fact that because of how Generation 1 CDPs were primarily focused on marketing use cases, the gravity is for that budget to sit with the CMO. And so we're having customer discussions and presentations and workshops where we're introducing people within their own organizations. And that often happens more kind of the top end, like the Telstras and the like. Yeah. But when you move more into the mid-market, I think it really takes either strong leadership from the very top to make some decisions, or a very close alignment across the leadership team at that kind of CEO -1 layer to really understand the purpose and balancing those kind of external market factors around providing better customer experience, growing revenue, accelerating marketing, even in a B2B use case, but then really staying true to the kind of customer data trust pillars that sit deeply within that CIO pillar, and trying to ensure that your own business doesn't stop in kind of paralysis around competing priorities, and you can actually understand what's right for the kind of top and bottom line of the organization and the various pathways to get there.
So when we talk about whose job is this, whose problem is this, it's not marketing, it's not customer service, it's not IT, it's the boss or the bosses. It's the CEOs, it's the board. It's not just about security and privacy and not, having a data breach. It's everything. And so this is one of the top 3 or 4 pillars that should be on the CEO's front of mind, every day for big, small, medium companies. Great. We'll skip to these data silos that we were talking about earlier. So a lot of businesses are struggling with data silos, or maybe a better way of saying it is fragmented information, which again is not a bad thing. That is completely normal and okay. So not just fragmented across systems, but departments and the data they collect. So how does an organization overcome that challenge? Like we're talking about it, but just before, like I want a unified view of my customer and everything about them, but just in a unified view of my data. How is this happening today in the marketplace?
I can start off. I think I talked about the data silos as they exist today. I don't think you're ever going to have one pure central source of truth where you literally would copy every individual piece of data and then manage it as one. I think that's kind of where MDMs probably started many years ago, where just the sheer volume of data didn't exist, and the complexity offers opportunity, but also challenges. Where we're seeing our approach is really centering it all around the customer. Like CRM is already the center point of your relationship with your customer, the interactions, how you talk to them, be that through sales, service, marketing, commerce, etc. Using that data layer at the base of CRM to then leverage, but not duplicate any of the other systems. And so you think about, like, I think just at my own house, obviously milk runs had an interesting run over the last little while, but now that it's kind of been reacquired and it's back live, I was ordering something and like there was a slight delay in the rider getting to the store. And as they pinged that, it's like, well, would you like to add anything else? And so it's like, if you then look at a manufacturing business, having a customer call you, probably to complain that their order's behind, think about the opportunity for whoever's receiving that phone call to have that information that this is the delay, or whether it's stock or whether it's actually shipping, so that you can be on the front foot around, actually, I know exactly why you're calling. This is where it's at. It will be with you in 2 weeks. And actually, by the way, would you like to add anything for a discount? So turning that potentially negative customer interaction actually into an upsell or a cross-sell. You can't do that with siloed data systems. But ultimately, you don't need to recreate your logistics and shipping system. You just need to make that information accessible to the person at the coalface of the client.
Yeah. And JC, you would agree? I mean, this is at the heart of, I think, the architectural change that we're seeing. And for me, if people are walking away from today with a key takeaway about what's changed in tech for data, it's exactly what Ian's talking about. So you got someone like Lightfold would traditionally, with the heartland of the idea of the one big single source of truth, these words are becoming less and less real. I remember many years ago, I was working on a project for one of the largest organizations in the world, across 27 different countries. And that was the day that, you know, the one big silo died for me, because just the speed of light means that that's just never going to happen. The way that modern architectures are starting to talk about data, and we see things like streaming data and data meshes and all that fun stuff, is they recognize that it is a flow, right? I say, you know, imagine going to your doctor and asking for a single source of blood. It's not going to be a very fun experience for you, right? But there's no requirement to do that. We don't expect that we have to stop you, take all your blood out to figure out what's going on. What does matter is the heart, because it's the point through which the flow moves. So that what we're looking at is people understanding that the role of the infrastructure has to not just be get all the data down into the big lake and then it sits there and stagnates. It has to be the flow continues, it goes back up, it generates new opportunity, it generates new engagements, it changes as it does it, and it flows back down. And when you view it that way, you move away from the monolith architecture, which is the problem, where you go, now we've got to go build yet another big store and it's going to cost a fortune. No, we don't. We just have to make sure we understand how the bits connect, and always challenge the traditional thinking that says my job is to just get it to that one destination, and instead go, no, our job is to make sure that we're mobilizing it constantly to keep generating that new information. And if you think about it, that's actually what machine learning needs you to do. It requires that constant cyclical effect. And it's just a matter of changing the mindset so that the guys with the data background aren't thinking about it in terms of, and now it goes here to die as a PowerPoint report, and instead realize, no, you're now a vibrant part of how the business drives growth, and how it drives its customer experience.
So we're leveraging data from these various silos or sources, and most of the time, I think in real time as well. So it's at the point of I need it, not I've got a board report, so let's start 3 weeks out.
And real time means different things for different people, right? Like, I think the important thing is that some people real time means, oh, wow, I find it out today. Some people it means, 500 milliseconds. The important thing is that it's not end of the week, end of the month, end of the quarter, which is how it's typically been seen. So that it will flow at whatever rate it needs to flow at, the natural cadence of your business, because the data is quite literally the business. It's the record of all the actions the business is taking.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think also there's a balance in that personalization or that activation of data. There's push and pull use cases as well. So like pull would be calls coming in. I need to be able to pull everything to be able to respond to this. I just obviously surprise and delight, good customer CSAT, reduced average handling time. I know I've got a sales meeting. What are all the other things that are touching this customer, and how do I pull that intel to provide kind of a compelling offering or show empathy where required? But then there's more the push activities. And you think about, like, if you have some form of a customer portal that you're using to allow customers to interact in more of a low touch environment with you, like, wouldn't you, if they're researching one of your products, wouldn't you love for your BDM to be told that? It's like your customers on our site right now reviewing something that they've never bought before, pushing that into, and this can be in financial services, it could be in manufacturing, it could be in consumer goods, obviously retailers, and kind of the B2C large organizations have probably been at the forefront of a lot of this. Like, how do you put data to work in an environment where you aren't having one-to-one human interactions? You have to use all the data triggers to push and express action, personalized emails. I think the shift that we've seen through the pandemic and people being locked at home, having lots of disposable income, but no way to spend it on holidays or kind of any external eating out, any of that type of stuff, apart from me probably single-handedly keeping Uber Eats alive. The B2C companies have really trod this path towards hyper-personalization, personalized experience that, like, I mean, all the panelists, everybody here on the call, we realize in our daily lives, the transition that we're seeing very quickly is that those expectations that we have as individuals from a B2C interaction are not being met in our B2B environments. And so I think B2C has kind of led the path for a number of reasons, due to size, scale, pandemic, online shopping habits, etc. But the reality is that B2B is catching up very quickly. And it's just a matter of which organizations are going to come the closest to it and which ones are going to be the laggards and what's that going to do to the competitiveness within the B2B landscape. And then the additional consideration, probably more for like consumer good brands wanting to go to direct to consumer, like the large B2C companies are here already. So if you're going to be B2C, like if you're going to compete with that experience, you're going to have to come a long ways to provide an equivalent or at least a close enough experience. Otherwise, you're purely just going to be competing on price.
And it's probably a bigger risk in some ways for a B2B. Like yesterday I had to send an email to an unknown, I won't say the name of the brand, but I bought some new running gear. 7-8 days later, hadn't heard anything. No confirmation, clicked on the track my order, dead page. Here I am thinking it's about $100 order. What the heck is going on here? So I emailed them, oh, we're sorry, it's coming. Now, the risk they run is I'm a little bit annoyed. They might send me a $20 pair of socks and I'm probably happy again, right? But you do that with a $50,000 order of wholesale goods to a B2B and they can't track when it's arriving, or even worse, it comes half fulfilled, or we could be talking millions. It's just that the whole, everything's on a much larger scale. And it's a lot harder to come back from those kind of poorer experiences if your customers have another option. Yeah, I'm just talking about these kind of customer data platforms playing a role beyond marketing. I mean, logistics and shipping is one we're seeing in a big way, that kind of connection with customer care teams to their ERP, to their warehousing, and having that information surfaced where at the point of complaint or request being really important. So how do you both think that CDPs impact and empower these teams? We've given a few examples, but have you got any others where that real-time or close to real-time data accessibility is giving different teams across the B2B space, I guess, ability to make good decisions or to change their behavior to help their customers? Maybe I'll go you first, JC.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the first thing for me is just to point out that that label CDP, again, kind of what we're saying is that that's been hashed out over the last few years, and that if we take it at its face value, customer data platform, right, we can use it more generally. But when we're talking about it in B2B, for all the reasons we just outlined, it can look very different. And I want to call out, like, one of the things that Salesforce is doing, which is really exciting, very clever, is Salesforce is really saying with Data Cloud that this isn't a point solution, that this is something which is going to be baked into the entire platform, all of it. And that's exactly what it needs to be. What we're seeing is that this idea of, we mentioned it several times, mobilize, right? Mobilize needs then a corresponding activation point. And what's clever about the Salesforce strategy is they've just gone all in. They've gone, actually, we need a solution, like Ian talks about, that's horizontal. It's going to provide this capability regardless of the sector. And that's exactly what Data Cloud's kind of chiming in on. So even though we're saying the word CDP, it's because that's where it's kind of evolved from. But if you're sitting, in a B2B business and going, I don't understand how that connects, just think about it again as like, just think data platform that's helping you mobilize this data to generate value for the customers. And one of the areas as well that I think is important to point out is, we mentioned there, if you have aspirations to go direct to customer, there's enormous competition coming into the Australian space, because logistics has completely changed. So I have many customers who are either both doing drop shipping or are competing with drop shipping. So once that starts to come into the mix, things like DIFOT, things like how you're managing, shipping and delivery, like you said, they really do matter, and you will be evaluated on them. So your ability to present that information, which you are often managing in your ERP, is actually a distinct value add on quite high value customers. The other thing too is that B2B tends to be more of an ecosystem, right? The B2C tends to be a distribution point, but the ecosystem element means that even though we're saying customer may mean different things for you. You may have a concept that some of your suppliers are also kind of a customer. You may have a view that your supplier interaction is pivotal to getting a good outcome for your customer. It's the same pattern. You're mobilizing data to help secure and generate the revenue and flow through. And that's what I enjoy about the B2B applications of these tech, is that it tends to then be a very ecosystem driven play that's touching multiple elements of the supply chain, as well as then sales, service, and marketing all the time. So I think that's the big thing with understanding CDP in the B2B space.
A couple
is
of
the
high-
platform's what matters.
So a couple of highlights back to you. And that high, who is your customer is interesting, because we would even argue our customers, their employees in some ways can be the customers. Like what kind of experience are giving your employees? Are they up till midnight trawling through spreadsheets to provide a good customer experience? Are they frustrated with the lack of, they're probably people in customer care. I'm focusing on them, or even sales, field sales, whatever it is. They want to do a good job, right? We trust that our staff want to do a good job. And if you're hampering them or not giving them, I guess, better and newer tools, what's that experience like for them? Just another couple of highlights from you guys. I've just been kind of noting down that, again, you said it earlier, Ian, I love the concept that a lot of these things were tested by big B2Cs. They failed, they spent all that money, and now we're able to leverage the insights and the lowering cost of goods. And if you're listening, I just want to stress that we're doing this every day with Salesforce and Lightfold, and it is not an onerous activity anymore, and it is not a hugely expensive one, and it is also not a big bang. If you can remember some of those things,
Yep.
We can do a lot very quickly with the tools available to us now. You mentioned AI, which we'll get to a little bit later. This is not an AI webinar, but we are kind of pushing the envelope there a lot. But that AI readiness starts with strong, accessible, trusted data. It's only as good as the information you can give it when it comes to working within your business. And this idea that it's not just a data strategy, we're talking about customer data strategies as well. And that idea of being able to segment and identify opportunities for improvement. So when we're looking at mid-sized companies specifically, how can a business effectively tackle these like data-related challenges? We've got things like security and privacy and consent management, and we do a lot of work in that space as well. Things like GDPR compliance or similar coming to Australia, big fines on the table, but also we talk about that personalization. So we've got resource limitations clearly in this space. B2B, mid-sized B2B or even large companies aren't just going and hiring 10 data scientists tomorrow. I doubt. So there's some resource limitations faced by people. What are some practical tools and strategies where you think our audience can employ to navigate and optimize operations, keeping these things in mind? Some practical advice, I guess. Ian, maybe you first.
Yeah, I think my own personal views, I think it starts with the front office, because I think they're closest to the customer. Like you talk to sales or the service leader, they feel the daily challenges that their field teams have in terms of their actual kind of front customer facing engagements. And you think years ago, CRMs like stop clicking through 30 different screens, just have one screen. But now it's actually, well, where does the information from that screen feed into? And is that done in the right way? I think your comment earlier about the B2C kind of going through that early phase and doing the big transformations is very right. And everything is right-sized down to really more of, and it's also probably what we're just seeing the market generally do as the economy is kind of under a little bit more pressure and contracting a bit. It's really iterative value-based projects. No more is there like, this is what we're going to do over the next 5 years, and here's multi-million-dollar budgets. It is for my person in the contact center, for my B2B seller, what is their pain point? What are they not able to do? How can I then pull the information in to be able to drop a better experience, be that through some of the kind of not GPT, but like machine learning around like, well, this is a key trigger that we've seen elsewhere, so maybe have this discussion. And I think that's where both from a tech side and then from organizations like CloudWorks and Lightfold, having seen it kind of at all ends of the market and having the learnings, the affordability to trial something and to actually say, this is the problem we're trying to solve. This is the experience we're trying to achieve. We actually only need 3 data sources and then 1 recommendation component to be added to provide a good personalized experience, as opposed to needing to say, we need to fix every data issue this company has ever had. So I think that right sizing of iterative value-based sprints, as opposed to feeling like it needs a complete overhaul of absolutely everything from the onset, is probably what we're seeing the most of. And it's something that I think people shouldn't be scared away of trying.
Yeah. And some from you, John, some practical advice for getting into the game, I guess.
I echo the same thing Ian said. I mean, I say it's a lot like the PT, the personal trainer saying, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. We have a whole technique about this on our site called Tesseract, specifically about trying to get data engineering to think more the way app engineering does around personas and around value-driven design. Creating a vertical slice that is value aligned is actually the best way to start, because when you do get into the nuts and bolts, and you do have to, particularly when we ask questions like, and I'm sure this will come up, security, privacy, GDPR, you cannot get around the fact that there is actually some pretty significant policy and technical decisions that have to be made, and you have to get them right. The thing is that if you just do it for that sake and that sake alone, you run the risk of the investment being something which doesn't immediately recognize value, whereas you could have your cake and eat it too. And this is the advantage of being customer centric in your data modeling and your data design. The same way we've been customer centric in our app design is that that's going to be where the GDPR risk is, but it's also where you're going to probably see the biggest value uplift as well. So getting that, as your initial point and getting started is more important than boiling the ocean. And then you can grow your sophistication to meet those needs more fully as you go.
So you can both of you are saying you can start small and you can start singularly.
But you have to start.
A couple of customer problems. But yeah, it's best time to grow a tree was when, John?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. 8 years ago.
Well, depends on the kind of tree, right? Like it's a big oak, maybe a bit longer ago. Yeah. And I think one of the things we maybe stressed before, and or maybe you brought up, John, around Salesforce particularly, which is the core platforms we work on, is that some of these things are being built into the platform now, right? Like the platform is getting better. If you're a Salesforce customer already, you probably have some of these capabilities that are rolling into your tech stack that you're not aware of, or smaller add-ons are available. Let's talk about money, cash. How do we afford this? There's obviously, if you weren't aware, a few things going on outside these walls in the economy, which making some companies pull the purse strings a little tighter. However, you can't save your way out of crisis generally. So how are you seeing customers of yours, Salesforce, Lightfold, kind of finding the resources for these kind of technology investments? And we mentioned being able to start small, and are they able to see some return on that investment fairly quickly to kind of fund the next one? Ian, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I think it's that starting with the challenge at the front office, but ensuring that the back office is fairly cleanly aligned throughout the entire process rather than just lumped in at the end. If you think the primary levers you've got in terms of having a measurable return are primarily going to be around increased revenue or decreased cost to serve. So I think if you're thinking about within a kind of contact center environment, if you can meaningfully show you've got a decreased average handling time, or even that you're actually able to turn some of those kind of inbound service inquiries to revenue generating opportunities, very easily measurable to track, I guess, the response back into a further business case. If you're talking about selling and the actual kind of B2B sales environment, I mean, everybody's being asked to do with more. How do you grow your revenues without actually having to grow your field sales teams? And so a lot of that has to do with just making them more productive, giving them better access to information. I know you said this isn't a AI and GPT discussion, but it's on everybody's mind. And I read an interesting white paper from McKinsey that covered the kind of 4 main applications where it's actually going to, and this is agnostic of any technology, where the shift from traditional machine learning to GPT, where it's actually going to drive the greatest kind of commercial and economic impact. And it's in sales and marketing, customer operations, and R&D. And so if you think about all those use cases, it's actually primarily in the front office, and then like deep back office around like medical devices and like doing kind of large computations around before you probably get too hands-on. But yeah, I think a clear business imperative and a board level, CEO level KPI or metric, which is often financial, that is either hurting or you feel is not being maximized. And then how can you take the top 1 or 2 things that will impact that so that the actual request you're making back to the business is as small as possible, but able to show a greater return. And then once you've done that once over, then what's use case 2, use case 3?
And JC, just before I throw to you with some kind of examples of how people are paying for this, we talk about business cases a lot when you're in sales, obviously, like you need to do a thing, how will you pay for it, what's the value, what's the return? I think one of the things we're asked a lot is AI. I want to be in AI, I want to use AI, but if you don't have some sort of data architecture and strategy behind it, it's not going to be super helpful, and it might sound, less sexy and exciting, but I think there's an imperative on executives to fix that foundation first before we're trying to play on the edges with the new exciting stuff. And I feel like that's, one of the things that we want to be getting out of today, right? Just set your foundations before you can go and play in the penthouse suite. John, some practical examples around, ROIs and some of this work that you've seen?
Yes. So again, like I'll be very blunt, as people know me, I will be. I've spent the last 10 years pitching to boards, pitching to, senior executives to take to boards with really one mission. Your data is not a cost center. Your data is a revenue center. And what's changed is that's gone from being an insane, crazy thing said by someone they assumed was trying to sell them stuff to being something where suddenly it's like, oh yeah, oh no, there's money. What's happened is we've, staring down the barrel of a global recession is I don't have to have that conversation anymore with the people who are investing. They know that, right? So it's now a case of if you're going into tighter times, which we are, there's only one cure for tighter times, and that is to compete. Australia has underinvested. You can see it in the numbers. It has underinvested in some basic stuff like data enrichment, data augmentation. They spend a fortune on knowing more about their customer in the States and in EMEA. We have lagged behind here in Australia. If we're lagging behind that, it means we're lagging behind the whole thing. And we are now competing on a global scale. Every single person I talk to in B2B is acutely aware of the fact that they're now in a global competition race. So the way you find it is you go, look, board, and you've got to think like the owner of the company, whoever they are, public or private. Do you believe that we're going to execute a strategy in this very difficult time that relies on us knowing more about the customer, using what we know about the customer? If so, then this is not a platform upgrade to a back office system. This is a mission critical capability to execute strategy. When you do that, you totally change the conversation. Like business case increasingly is like that's old language, right? Particularly if what you're doing is you're not trying to make a big bang. If you're asking them to take a massive risk, sure, right? But when you're just talking about, guys, we can't do generative AI if we haven't even got a basic set of descriptors for customer standardized. That's just a prudential thing that most boards get. And then it's a matter of working within what is a reasonable budget that they can work with. Back to that, do what you can, use what you got. That's always my advice, and it's doubly so now.
And again, we've stressed this a few times. This is not a fantasy. If you're a CIO, CEO of a mid-sized B2B company, this is a reality. You can do it today. And this is not the Jetsons or Star Trek in the future, everything we're talking about. And I think, I'll skip over this next little section in the interest of time to get some of the questions, but I also don't need a data science degree to make this happen. People like John have them, but no, seriously, also it's not as crazy as it used to be, right? Like we can simple-minded folks like myself can actually understand most of the things now and put it in action. So you've both got experience working with big and small businesses. We're talking about the mid-market and B2B at the moment. Can you give us some examples on how these businesses are adopting these tools? One or two recent examples you can reference, maybe Ian, you first.
Yeah, I mentioned, I think a few already, probably offered them early on, and there's a couple I just can't share brands. But I think it's in the selling environment, a lot of that shopping behavior, and particularly like online browsing, like some of the best clear signals around when you should then apply your field service, your field selling teams, is when the customer is giving triggers of being in a buying cycle, whether that be for net new customer acquisition, or somebody that's probably more of like a retained customer doing standard ongoing orders, and how can you look at growing the size of those or cross-sell into other offerings that you've got. But yeah, I think when we look at the current focus of the economy, like everybody's got shrinking wallets, and so trying to make sure that you at least keep the same share of wallet, if not try to grow that at the cost of competitors or even maybe adjacent suppliers to those businesses. But then within contact center or the servicing environment, which is obviously as important to customer sentiment, I think when you think about all the great buying experiences, one really poor service experience can actually sour somebody's relationship. So although it's not the shiny front end of the business always, I think that service experience can never be decoupled from the likelihood of that customer purchasing or extending spend. So being able to manage the organization's cost by making the service agents more efficient, provide, I guess, a better experience, but lower time, lower resource internally. It's a really tricky balance. But again, if people aren't enabled and empowered with the entire view of the customer, that interaction is going to seem clunky. It's going to take extra time to go and find the information. I'm so happy with how little I get left on hold these days, because you're starting to see that happen a lot more. But again, most of my interactions are primarily in the B2C space. So how much time are B2B customers stuck in that experience, and therefore their B2C and B2B experiences are further and further apart.
I've got a question for you, John, from our audience. I'm going to read it because otherwise I'll get it wrong. How can we effectively integrate AI and machine learning into our existing data analytics processes to predict future customer behavior and market trends without compromising the quality of our current customer service and operations?
It's a very interesting question, because I think in the question it's kind of implied this idea that the process of prediction could negatively impact experience. And well done, because you're already now a couple of steps ahead. Because of course it can. But one of the biggest things, we've spent a lot of time. We've been on board the AI for business train for a very long time, and we spend a lot of time trying to teach practical AI, which is very much about, like, don't get obsessed with the froth. Just focus on what it's really here to help us do, which is to automate things. So when we're talking about a recommendation that's going to have a very personal impact, like talk to this person about this thing, the most important thing is you must not allow that entire process to occur as a siloed data science initiative. It has to be done deeply in alignment with the people who are actually talking to the customer and are custodians of the customer relationship. Because I'll give you an example. We've worked with a major finance organization that were convinced that the predictive tool that we needed was a way to recommend the next product that should be put into the portfolio. What we analyzed, talking to the people actually booking the meetings with these businesses that they were doing finance with, actually what they needed was just something that helped them understand who was going to pick up the phone. Because a 30% increase in effectively booking the sessions was way, way more effective than trying to fine tune which product we're going to recommend. It was better to get a fully trained rep out to that person at the right time and let the rep do that than it was to try and overtly predict. So the first thing is understanding, like, where the predictions are going to help customer service with a low risk of that negative impact, and just go for those. Then the second one is, if you are going to go in on a space where you do want to directly shape and evolve the customer experience, again, you need to do it not just with feedback from the customer, feedback from the people in your business who already know the customer and who already have that conversation. Lean on the people. What happens too often is this assumption that because it's AI and it's complicated, it's going to run away with whoever we've brought in to do that, and then hope that it'll come back. That's how we wind up with failed AI implementations. Do it deeply in consultation with, and in code development and design with, the people in the business who actually manage that relationship. That's my number one bit of advice.
So we can tick AI off the webinar bingo scorecard, and we're about to do the second one, which is GDPR. So this is to both of you, whoever goes first. How can B2B businesses ensure compliance with GDPR like regulations whilst leveraging customer data for things like lead generation, upselling, cross-selling, customer retention, et cetera, et cetera? And so how do we ensure compliance, and what kind of specific measures needed to be taken to make sure that the use of these analytics tools and technologies doesn't violate those GDPR-like rules? Do you want to have first crack, John, and Ian, you have a think about how we're doing that from a products perspective as well at Salesforce?
And I'll give a lead in for Ian. So the first thing is, like, our core business is establishing platforms that have to comply with GDPR. So, and whatever else version of it's going to be here. So the thing we have to be really clear about is there is no product you can buy that guarantees to meet your requirements under legislation. That's your job, right? But there are products you can buy that will dramatically accelerate how you respond to it. So that the first thing is to understand that under right to be forgotten and similar laws, it's not just about processing a request. It's also sometimes just a baked in, you have to forget about it. So that automatically, the moment you say that, a cascading delete, we're talking once again about a whole stack. It's yet another reason why we're seeing the data stack and the front end stack having to work together. They have to make this real. Now, the challenge is, so the first one is we've got to have a data model and a data architecture that's actually going to execute that. But the second step is, how do you facilitate the capture? How do you facilitate the process by which someone could rescind? And that's where you actually then need an application layer, particularly embedded into your sales service and marketing point. That's where the privacy center stuff from Salesforce is awesome. And like exactly the right solution is that if you talk about it in terms of good architecture, making the app layer responsible for processing the request and providing a standard protocol for how it then tells the rest of the business to forget it and how to treat it is really, really important. And sorry, just the second point though, there's a very specific part of that question, which was, and how do we then do the analytics without violating GDPR? It's a really good point. And again, it comes back to quality data modeling. Inside your data layer, you need to have a solution that's going to ensure that PII data or personal data can self-destruct when the right to be forgotten is activated, but you have a robust model solution that's going to preserve the analytical history, which you are allowed to do, so long as all trace of that identifying personal information has been erased. So again, it comes back to, this is actually quite a deep well when we dig deep down into it, which is why we don't want you to go right down, the whole way. Get started and start incrementally improving the security. Ian, if you want to, what's your take on the privacy center?
I think you've hit a lot of it. Like fundamentally, technology is just building blocks, and this is where I love getting to work with both of you and many of our other partners, because it's actually how you actually put the building blocks or the Legos into application. Because we can build whatever base functionality meets global, local regulations, but ultimately, once you even get past what the actual system does and some of those auto delete rules and storage, or just even guardrailing which users within a business can access which level of data, there's a whole piece around people and process enablement that actually has nothing to do with technology, that often gets so forgotten about. And again, this is when the back and the front office aren't always talking. Back office say, cool, system meets requirements, tick, we're all done. But then you actually have somebody in the front office that hasn't been trained adequately around what GDPR and any of these regulations are. You even think like internally at Salesforce, we go through quite regular enablement and training around all this data privacy, data accessibility, and it's using our own tools to do it ourselves. But there's a huge like human warm body enablement, coaching and training aspect that just can't be overlooked. And that's not a technology answer. That's a consulting engagement that then flows throughout a business.
Yeah, and John, we're working on a bunch of these at the moment. We have for those listening, we have a technology stack. We have a systems architecture that actually paves the way, and some of those are products that we prefer to use, but we can also use in existing infrastructure that our clients bring to us. Everything from the privacy center down to the data warehouse or data cloud and everything in between. So if you're interested in this thing, we're doing this privacy and consent management kind of analysis for a range of big and small companies at the moment. I want to wrap up in a second, but just I want to summarize a few things. And John and Ian, if I make mistakes, please correct me in front of our audience. But what we've learned over the last few years partnering with Lightfold Salesforce is that business owners should not feel overwhelmed about this. Or maybe you should, but you don't need to. And if you are, that's okay. But don't be burdened by that idea of catching up, and it's going to take a huge loan, and you have to invest $1 kajillion to get in the game. And that's one of what the purpose of today is you can get in the game really quickly and easily and with a very small investment, and then you start growing from there. Yeah, we can take a lot of experiences from the B2C world into B2B, and you're going to have to, like that personalization, that customer experience. But again, we can leverage what's been done before us, and we can build on those building blocks. We do have one more question that's come through, which I think is kind of leading in from that, is if I want to get started, what do I need internally as a business? What do I need to get started on a data project, for want of a better term? So governance, security, like where do I start, John? You know, you and I are doing this quite a bit with customers. What's the first step?
Yeah, and look, I might let's be clear about two parts of that. There's the process of, you know, starting the project. There's the process of like literally internal resources and team. If they're starting the process, again, your friendly neighborhood CloudWorks and Lightfold are very happy to support, you know, structured discovery, and that would be my key thing. Is that one thing I'm trying to get everybody to understand is if you are engaging in a digital transformation initiative, if you are thinking about how to invest to improve self-service and marketing, data is not a phase 3 and it's not a reporting requirement. It's fundamentally linked to that. So make sure that whoever you're working with, getting that type of roadmap and advice, they understand that. It's not, oh yeah, we also have this data stuff. It's like, no, they're one and the same. Otherwise, what are you doing? That'd be the first point. Make sure the advice and the road mapping has it deeply integrated. In terms of like internal resourcing, this is a question I get asked a lot. People are worried about the whole, do I need 1 million data scientists? I recommend everybody check out from a company called DBT, big in the modern data stack. They've come up with a beautiful term called the analytics engineer. It's a brand new role. I wish I'd known it because it perfectly describes me for most of my career. And that's actually, you can start with that. You can start with one. You can start with somebody who, kind of like the first trailblazers, when we think about, you know, how Salesforce got started, you can start with someone who's actually kind of a business person who then has a bit of tech enablement and can then start to build the box from a business aligned perspective. The analytics engineer does a very similar thing. From there, you can then grow out into your data scientists, you can grow out into your analysts as well. You can deepen into your data engineering, right? It can grow from that point. But just starting with one person whose job is not going to go straight to deep tech, but is going to be about good old fashioned aligning the data that comes out of the systems to the business need. That's enough to get going.
I'm going to wrap up. We're kind of at the end. I want to thank Ian and John for your time today. I want to thank everyone who joined us today I was going to say in person, but live for the webinar, but also thank everyone who's watching this at some point in the future, maybe my grandkids one day, who knows. Thanks for the questions that we've got. Everyone today will get a copy of the recording, but also the entire on-demand series. I think there's three other webinars that have gone before us. This is the last one. You'll send I'm going to read this because I might get it wrong. If you missed any of the previous sessions, please scan the QR code on the screen and you can access the on-demand entire series. Definitely worth the time to watch and learn. I hope you had fun. This is a really interesting time, and it's a really interesting topic, and it's one you can't afford to avoid. So if you want more information, please reach out to any of us or the person that invited you to this webinar. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye and take care.